Record.
Thank you for telling us.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's presentation. And St. Louisans should know that today is opening day for the Cardinals. And we are so lucky to have a St. Louisan, St. Louis born Steve Stollier here today to talk with us about his new book. I want to ask everybody to hold your questions until the end of Steve's presentation, and then you can ask him anything you want. Right, Steve? Anything? Maybe?
Not my social security number or my passwords, but
Okay.
yeah.
All right, but anything else besides that? Today's presentation was made possible through the Saul Brodsky Library Lazaroff Community Lecture Series, a program of the Jewish Federation of St. Louis and the Mirowitz Center. And I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Ronnie Brockman, who is on behalf of the Saul Brodsky Library, is going to introduce Steve.
Well, welcome everybody, and thank you very much for being here with us. I know that many of you were here last year when Steve spoke to us about his raised eyebrows many years as with Groucho Marx. And we welcome you back again. Thank you for being here. For those of you, we appreciate it. For those of you who weren't here, Steve, like Susan said, Steve is from St. Louis. Many of his relatives are on here, and I'm sure that they can join me in saying that we welcome you back to St. Louis, even if it only is virtual. And we are thrilled that you have now written a second book, and that we get to be an important part of your journey.
If that's for me, I'm not here.
No, it's mine, and I've been getting a lot of bad calls this morning, and I can't control that.
Why don't we put them on and tell them where to go?
Yeah, nah. They don't even answer when you answer. But anyway, for those of you who may not know about Steve Stollier, he has been a professional writer for over 40 years. And he used to write material for Dick Cavett, as well as many episodes that we've seen on TV, like Murder, She Wrote, or Simon and Simon, and the new WKRPN in Cincinnati. And but he's really well known for writing and producing documentaries on such diverse personalities as John Lennon and the Marx Brothers and Elvis Presley, and even Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We feel very lucky that he has shared first a personal view of what it was like to be working with Groucho Marx. But this book today, if all of you have read any part of it, if not even completed it, Steve shows us a part of his family that only his family may know about. And from what I understand, many of the people in his family who've read the book didn't know about some of the things. So I really appreciate you sharing your dad's letters with us. And it really has given us, if you haven't read it, you may want to read it when he's done, because it gives you a really personal look at one person's first eye view of what it was like to serve in the war and be away from your family. And I think many of us can relate to that in many different ways. So without further ado, I'd like Steve to share with you his own personal view of why he wrote the book and what it meant to him and to his family. So thanks, Steve, for being here.
My pleasure. I want more ado. Give me 3 more minutes of ado, and then, no, all right. A do's and a don'ts, and a 1 and a 2. I have put together a book that is titled Salamis and Swastikas, Letters Home from a GI Jew. And there's a very good reason for all of the words in that title, which I'll get to. But my mom and dad were from St. Louis. And she was Amy Schwartz and he was Dave Stoliar. And they met and fell in love and got married in January of 41 at Sheremoth Temple. And in June of 42, they had a little girl named Carol. And then Dad got a draft notice, and he thought that husbands who were also fathers were exempt from having to serve. So when he was called to go down to the office, he brought that up to the fellow in charge and said he thinks that a mistake has been made. And the guy found that very interesting. And then dad was off to basic training. That was not the case. And he served for 3 years. Most of 43, he served in the States between basic training and maneuvers, and then going out to Pinedale, California, which is near Fresno. But once he shipped away from America, he and mom vowed to write each other every day. And they came shockingly close to achieving that goal. They wanted to keep the connection as continuous as they could. And so even on days when dad wasn't able to write a letter, he would begin the next letter with, here's why there's no letter of April 24th. I had to go out with the Jeep to get supplies, and then it was too late for this, and then there was chow and I was exhausted, and then I had to go do this. Do you forgive me? Almost all the letters are to my dearest wife and baby, and end with much love, your Dave. It totaled more than 500 letters of more than 2,000 pages. And I couldn't just scan them. I had to sit at my trusty iMac and hammer away on the keyboard, wearing out my A key until it looked like a molar with a cavity in it where you could see the metal showing through. So I had to get a new keyboard partway through. But when my sisters and I started reading the letters, which we hadn't read before about 10 years ago, I was struck by how well written they were, which was something of a revelation, and also how rich they were, because dad took such detailed, it was such a granular look at day-to-day life of a GI in North Africa and Italy and France and Germany and then England. And so in addition to all of the historic things, you know, we're doing well, we're pushing the Nazis back. I heard about the thing at Iwo Jima, you get all the historical things, but you also get dad's thumbnail reviews of movies. I know one of them, he said, I saw To Have and Have Not. I don't think this Lauren Bacall has much of a future. Her voice is too deep. I think maybe 1 or 2 more movies and that'll be it. He was off on that, but he was otherwise spot on. And he would compare, he would say to mom, you know, have you seen this yet? I recommend it. Or she would write him and say, have you seen Meet Me in St. Louis yet? Because Carol's learning how to sing the songs. And that was such a source. It was so bittersweet for dad to be hearing about how Carol was growing up without him, because she was only like a year and a half when he went overseas. And so those formative years, he's half a world away trying to raise his daughter. And that was a big, you know, he would see movies in which one of the characters had a little girl, had to leave the wife behind, and it would put a lump in his throat. There's a lot of deep emotion in the letters, which frankly, my sisters and I did not see in the Dave Stoliar we grew up with. He tended to be fairly stoic and unemotional, but there are strong passions in these letters. I mean, there's the yearning for his wife and baby, but there's also his hatred of the Nazis, which, you know, obviously does not reflect poorly on him. I would be surprised if he were sticking up for the Nazis, but his hatred starts at about a 10 and then goes up from there. And you get passages like, you know, it's all I can do to keep from shooting the next German prisoner I see in the head. I hear about the atrocities they've committed, and it sickens me how well the Americans have to treat the enemy prisoners, because they sure as hell aren't treating us that way. He thought that was really unfair. but there's a lot of philosophy in the letters. Also, he was a lifelong Cardinals fan, and in 1944, there were two St. Louis teams, the Cardinals and the Browns. I'm sure that isn't news to a lot of you, but they used to be the Browns. And it turned out that in 44, there was an all St. Louis World Series. It was between the St. Louis Cardinals and the St. Louis Browns. And it just killed Dad that he couldn't go out to Sportsman's Park with Mom and the baby Carol and watch two teams from St. Louis playing each other. You know, how often does that happen? And he's thousands of miles away, but he did get to hear some of it on the radio. So anyway, I figured that a lot of these would be of interest to people beyond just the immediate family, because I've always had a passion for history. And also I like to think that I have a talent for editing and for sort of taking the macro view of a bunch of rough material and seeing potential in it. And I thought, this isn't just something, a vanity thing, like converting my home movies to DVD. There's fascinating stuff in here, politically, historically, culturally, and then it's all filtered through the prism of what was basically a secular Jew from St. Louis. Dad was not a particularly religious man. He didn't read or speak Hebrew. We didn't observe the Sabbath, much less keep it holy. You know, the only temple was Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, like a lot of Jews do. And he didn't tend to talk about God or Jews or religion, but you get that in these letters. You know, there's no such thing as an atheist in the foxhole, and I think that's true. And there's a lot of references to God, which were kind of surprising, because as I say, he didn't really talk much about God thereafter. But like when FDR died towards the end of the war in Europe, Dad said, I guess God needed to take the president as a trade-off for all the progress we've been making in the war. He saw that as a sort of beshert thing. And so the salami reference is, you know, there's a delicatessen in New York called Katz's Deli, and their motto is, send a salami to your boy in the army. Because Mr. and Mrs. Katz had three sons who were in World War II, and they all yearned for a salami as a bit of home. And Dad begged Mom to send him a kosher salami. And the first few arrived rotten, and it was just hell for Dad because he was so eager every day at mail call, is the salami here yet? And then he finally gets it and he tears it open and he knows what's in it, and then it smells like an animal died. And he realized that being in the hold of a ship going over from the States to Italy in the summer, it just wasn't in the cards. But he did finally manage to get some decent salamis, and then was asking for kosher dill pickles and herring and all the things that he couldn't get over there. And then at one point, Mom sent him a can of shrimp, which he thanked her for and said, I'm not gonna open the shrimp until I get some cocktail sauce. And I thought, here you are avoiding the Luftwaffe strafing the jeeps and bombs, luckily duds, falling through the ceiling of the building he was in, and you know, up to their knees in mud, and not knowing if they're going to be sent to the Pacific after the war in Europe is over. But he's holding out for cocktail sauce, because you know, what's the point of digging into to a tin of shrimp if you can't eat it right? So anyway, so I put together this book, and here's what the cover looks like, the front and back covers. Or I should say the back and front covers. It was there, take my word for it. There is on the back, Dad actually eating a piece of matzah on Passover in 1945. It's astonishing, you know, there's nearly 50 photos in the book, and someone actually snapped a picture of Dad eating matzah at a Passover Seder in a bombed out temple in Nancy, France. So that's on the back cover. On the front is his trusty dog, Nancy, that he made friends with, and they had all sorts of adventures in Germany and England in the last year or so of the war. And then there's some really wonderful blurbs on the back that are very gratifying, and they're really a testament to Dad. They're not, I mean, yes, I edited it, but I mean, like Dick Cavett said, it's a rare, moving, colorful, intimate look at war from inside the beast. Woody Allen said, I couldn't have lived through what the author of these letters lived through. Great fun to read, but also heartbreaking. Steve Karras, who produced a documentary on the Jewish refugee soldiers of World War II, said it's an important addition to the historical record. And then actor, author Stephen Tobolowsky said they called it humorous and heartbreaking, endearing, moving, and unforgettable. So again, that's a testament to what Dad got across from his letters. Yes, I had to edit a lot. I mean, what's in the final book is less than half of the total amount. There was a lot of dross that didn't really go anywhere, and I didn't want to bore people with a lot of details on things that didn't really pay off. But it was such a treasury of material to work with that even if he weren't a relative, I would have recognized its historical value, and as a time capsule of the 40s with all the references to movies and singers and big bands and Your Hit Parade and the Cardinals and all that stuff. So the next picture is, let's see, I think it is that Mom and Dad's wedding picture, January 41 at Sheremuth Temple, as I mentioned. Their wedding processional was Chopin's Nocturne, and they honeymooned in Niagara Falls, of all the cliched places to honeymoon. And let's see, the next picture is, that's Mom and baby Carol and Dad in Fresno. Before he shipped overseas, he knew he would be stationed there long enough that it made sense for Mom and Carol to come out from St. Louis and rent an apartment so they could spend some quality time before saying goodbye to Dad until who knows when. So that was the picture. That's a picture of them in happy times together before he was shipped overseas to fight the Krauts. So now I am going to read excerpts from some of the letters, and what I've tried to do is keep it focused mostly on St. Louis or Jewish themes or both. The first one is from February of 44, written in North Africa. This is just a part of it. He said, by the way, one of the Jewish boys who was in town told me there's a whole colony of Jewish prostitutes there, off limits. Well, I can't believe it until I see it, and I probably won't see it. They're all supposed to be refugees from France, Poland, Russia, and other European countries. Almost unbelievable, isn't it? Last week I had lunch with a friend of mine, Arnie Kogan. This is me talking, not Dad. Arnie is 88 years old, and he was a writer. He wrote a lot of movie and TV parodies for Mad Magazine from 1959 until a couple of years ago. Won an Emmy for writing for Carol Burnett. He got a copy of my book and read it cover to cover. The first thing he said when I sat down to lunch was, I want to know more about the colony of Jewish prostitutes in Algeria. You've got to find out. I said, I'm sorry, all there is that fragment that my dad wrote. He said, I need to know more about that colony of Jewish prostitutes. So anyway, the next letter was in March of 44, still in North Africa. It was certainly a grand old feeling to read the St. Louis Post-Dispatch again. It made me forget that I was even away from the US and made me feel as though there wasn't even a war on. All those advertisements made me feel lonesome, however. Well, darling, just to remind you that I love you and miss you very much, kiss the baby for me and tell her that Daddy will be coming home soon. Give my regards to everybody. Tell them to keep up the good work back home. With all my love, your Dave. The thing about coming home soon, he kept thinking that he was coming home soon. And he would say, well, it looks like the progress the Allies are making. I expect to be home by Christmas. And then you realize he wouldn't be home until Christmas of a year from then. But he was always saying, I'll be home soon, I'll be home soon. Still 1944, North Africa. At this time, your mother must be getting the house in shape for Passover. How would you like to send me some fried matzahs? By television, I guess. An early reference there. Boy, some of those dishes would certainly come in handy now. There I go, thinking about food again. Well, darling, give my regards to all. Love and kisses for yourself and Carol. All my love, Dave. March of 44, North Africa. Yesterday, I picked up the rations of Passover matzahs, which each Jewish man is allowed. We each get 3 regular boxes, not bad. It's real American matzahs made in Brooklyn. The Jews over here don't have that type. They have a round, hard matzahs, which doesn't look at all appetizing. Anyway, I spoke to the Hebrew chaplain, who was a captain, and he advised us to bring our matzahs to the synagogue with us, and we'll probably be invited to dinner by anyone there. So I'm looking forward to an unusual experience if I'm able to attend. Boy, that must really be something to see Carol Francis reading a prayer book. The amazing thing is that it has no pictures and she still was attracted to it. Well, that's my daughter for you. I guess you had something to do with it, however. Well, darling, that's all the dope for now. So give my best wishes to all for a most enjoyable Passover and Easter. Love and kisses, your Dave. Then April of 44, still in North Africa. Yesterday, while on pass, I stopped at a synagogue to see what it was like inside. It was a tremendous place and had a very large interior. It had a very high dome, and the altar was also dome-shaped. The place where the Torah is kept is in an archway with velvet curtains in the doorway. There were many 7-candled candelabra and very artistic in design. The cantor's place was in the center of the place. The chief rabbi's pulpit was on the side, like in an English church. The Star of David was in all the windows and in the ceiling. All around the walls were tables listing the names of the members who had died in World War I. Above the entrance to the synagogue was a balcony for the choir and a very large pipe organ. Well, when I came, they were just getting ready to perform a wedding. The bride in bridal attire of white carrying African lilies and the groom in full dress with their relatives arrived on horse carriage. The attendants sat in front or on the sides, the males on one side, the females on the other. The chief rabbi placed a talith over their heads and conducted the ceremony in French. In between periods, the choir boys sang, the organist played, and a very excellent singer sang one song. Then, after they were officially married, they received the congratulations in the study of the rabbi. I told them Mazel Tov, and they understood. After that, I went back to look the synagogue over and helped the second rabbi to clear away the religious bells and symbols which are placed over the Torah. Incidentally, they have a very peculiar custom over here. Baskets are passed for donations for the newly married couple. I gave 2 francs, which was a lot compared to what I saw others give. After that, the couple left in the carriage for their new home. It was certainly a nice innovation for me and something which I'll never see again, perhaps. April of 44. I took advantage of the opportunity given the Jewish soldiers, invitations to homes of native people in town. A couple of other fellows and I were invited to the same home, so we all left together. Our host's name is Mr. Alfred Ashash. They've always lived in the area. We met Mr. Ashash's mother and his father and their wives and his sister and her husband. They're all middle-aged people and had young children, the oldest being a 16-year-old girl who spoke English pretty well. Well, we sat down to the Seder and the ceremony was conducted in Hebrew. The Bible also had a French translation just beneath it. We all had a nice time trying to understand each other fully. They all were very pleased with our conduct and insisted that we return today if possible. We brought 3 boxes of matzahs with us, and it's far superior to the native matzahs, which was very coarse and round. It's made of a gray flour and is thicker. Anyway, the way we found out that our matzahs were better was the young son of Mr. Rashash said it tasted better. You know that a child is not diplomatic because they always speak the truth. We had muscatel wine and some anisette. I don't care for anisette. You'll probably like it. It tastes like licorice. The meal was not so good. It all was so strange to us. The only thing we did eat was the meat, dates, and oranges. Of course, we hated to leave food on our plates because food is so scarce around here. So I had to force some of that stuff down in order to make them happy. Well, we had to leave early in order to get back to camp on time. So we apologized and departed. May of 44, now in Italy. Today, I happened to pick up a few English soldiers on the road and gave them a lift. It turned out they were Yiddish and from Palestine, Tel Aviv to be exact. So the English have finally outfitted an all-Jewish unit for active duty against the Nazis. Remember about 4 years ago, the English refused to listen to such a proposal? Well, these men are really anxious to get at the Germans. They told me that they hold Friday services each week and invited me to attend. If we can get permission from the CO, we'll probably go. June in Italy. I happened to catch a Nazi propaganda broadcast this morning, and to hear the sort of stuff they put out, you'd think they're winning the war instead of losing it. I can't see how the German people can absorb all that hooey. The Nazis stated that the Russians had lost 50,000 airplanes, 70,000 tanks, and 12,700,000 men. If that was all true, how in the world did they ever get the Jerrys to retreat so fast and so far? Another outrageous statement was that the Jewish soldiers in the American army are receiving 25% more food than the non-Jews. They say that due to Jewish food laws, that difference is in effect. Have you ever heard anything so ridiculous? We all eat in the same mess out of the same type of mess kits and are given the same portions any other soldiers given. That just shows you the type of stuff they're putting out. I'm glad nobody pays any attention to that stuff. August 44, Italy. We still keep in touch with baseball through the Stars and Stripes, and I noticed that the Brownies are now 7 games ahead. I certainly hope they hang on till the season ends. That would really be something to have an all St. Louis World Series. I wish I could be there to see the series. I'll bet we make Carol Francis a baseball fan before she's 15 years old. We'll take her out for Sunday doubleheaders, and you can take her on ladies' days. Well, darling, that's the news now from Italy. Regards to all, beaucoup love and kisses for Carol and you with all my love, your Dave. September. I read that there won't be any popcorn or peanuts available in Sportsman's Park for the World Series. That, my friend, is a major tragedy. After all, what is a series without those things? It's damn tough the people back home are going to have to do without these things. After all, we over here are getting whatever our hearts desire. Why bitch about it? It will all be over soon, and we'll be driving over to Vic's and Garavelli's again for the things we like. September 44, Italy. That was a very appropriate speech that Secretary of War Robert Patterson made for Yom Kippur. It'll help remind people that the Jews are also dying for our causes. I also see the British finally agreed to supply an all-Jewish regiment from Palestine. It took plenty of time. Back in 1939, the Jews there volunteered, but the haughty British didn't take to the idea. October 44, Italy. We just finished listening to the first World Series game, which was broadcast directly from St. Louis. At the beginning, when the announcer described the warm, sunny day in St. Louis, I felt just like I was back in my old hometown again. The only difference was that instead of the sun peering down at us, we had his brother, the moon. That was a tough game for the pitcher, Mort Cooper, to lose. After all, he only allowed 2 hits, but oh, what hits. The Cards still ought to take the series. We're having a tough time getting the game clearly because it's broadcast through the chain to Boston, to Italy, and over the PA system. However, it wasn't too bad, and we were able to catch most of it. It's amazing how such small things as a ball game can take me back to you in such a hurry. The amazing thing is we didn't even count on getting the game. I was asking the nurse about the hospital putting it on over the PA. She didn't think that we'd get far in asking. Well, there was a captain and in the same ward who was also interested in the game being broadcast. After all, there are many bed patients who would like to hear it, so he and I went up to special service section and asked about it. We were told they hadn't been able to get the station, which was to rebroadcast the game on their radio, but if they did succeed, they'd put it on in spite of the fact that everybody's supposed to be asleep by 9:30. So the game came on suddenly at 7:45 p.m. and it was 2 hours later that I started this letter. October 7th, 1944. The ball game was broadcast again last night, but it started to clog up and the static made it impossible to complete the broadcast. However, the damage had been done and the score was Brownies 4, Cards 1 at the time they shut down. The Brownies are really one surprise after another. I'm still confident the Cards will win out. Well, darlings, that's about all the dope for today. Tell Carol I'll try to take her to next year's World Series. And if her mother's a good girl too, I'll take her too. November 11th, 1944, from France. So today is Armistice Day. Well, so we ain't neat and we're at war instead of peace to commemorate this day. It's tough that we humans are so forgetful and can't remember all the lives that have been lost in the past in wars that have brought us absolutely nothing but grief. Of course, it's hardly possible to think that I can place the Japs and Germans in that same category with us, but they do breathe. This day is just going to pass as another day of the year because in years to come, there'll be another war and wars after that. However, just to kid ourselves, we will pay tribute to our dead and dedicate this day to them, swearing that we'll never go to war. That gesture is just as hypocritical as the Jewish Day of Atonement and the confession of the Catholics. We will remember for that one day and forget for the rest of the year. I really don't know why I should get so philosophical because as an individual, I'll never be able to do anything to correct these things that will occur inevitably. So let's let it go as a day which has gone for naught. Personally, it has only added another day to that long list of days we've been separated from each other. On the other hand, it has shortened the number of days we are to be apart. December 14th, 44, France. The mail brought us some more special service magazines. I just finished looking at the pictures of the World Series in life. That shot of the scoreboard in Sportsman's Park really made me homesick. There was a very clear and appetizing sign advertising Alpenbrow. I guess those little things are really big after you miss them a while. December 44, France. Dad became friendly with a woman whose husband had been kidnapped by the Nazis and put in a slave labor camp. And they had a grown daughter and Dad befriended them for quite a while. And he would have long talks with them, philosophizing. So he said, we also discussed the Jewish situation. She said the French had always felt for the Jews, and when the Jerrys were here, they would defy the Jerrys on the streets. She also told me of one incident when a young mother was walking down the street in Nancy, and a Jerry soldier stopped her and told her to go across the street for something. She started to take her baby with her, but the soldier told her to leave the baby in the buggy. She went across the street, and when she returned to her buggy, there lay her baby, strangled to death. It was only 2 months old. That is just one of the many atrocities they are all guilty of. This woman told me that she had many good Jewish friends before the war and even now. All the big department stores were owned by Jews, and one at which her sister worked before the war had treated her generously when her sister was ill in bed for months. So she was really emphatic in her admiration of the Jews and said they would all soon return and enjoy France once more. When I told her there were instances of anti-Semitism in the States, they were both surprised. I explained that most of it was due to propaganda and jealousy. They said that in France, it was also true that many of the Gentiles were envious of the Jews because they were successful in business and noted doctors and lawyers. Well, all in all, it seems the French treated the Jews better than the Americans. At least that's what I gathered from the little talk we had. December 22nd of 44. After lunch, I remembered I had planned to attend services. Bernie Ellison came running down saying he'd go along, and he had a ride for us to wing headquarters in a Jeep. We got to the synagogue at about 4 and stood up all the time prayers were said. It was colder than a Nazi's heart in there. The place had lost a lot of its former beauty due to the Germans' destruction when they had occupied Nancy. There were still a number of Jews in the city who turned out for the services, so they must have prayed doubly hard. The rabbi was a chaplain, and the whole service took only about an hour. After it was over, he announced that he had a number of mezuzahs, the small metal tube with the prayer inside. So I went over and got one. That was the first time I had gone to services since I left the States. It was sort of uncomfortable at first. However, after I concentrated on the prayer book, I fell right into the thing. As you may have guessed, we read the Friday evening services, and those who found it necessary said Kaddish. There were mostly GIs there, and a lot of them brought along some candy for the children who happened to be around. Well, it was about 5 when we got out and 6 when we got back to headquarters. January 22nd of 45, France. You had better not look for a letter of the 21st, as I went to that dinner and was unable to write. At about 11:15, Dines and I took off for the place. Ellison couldn't go, so I asked Joe to go along. On the way, we saw a bakery, so we decided it would be a nice gesture to buy some snacks. So we bought some small custard cakes and pieces of honey cake. When we got there, they were so happy to see us. We sat around in the living room for a while and talked. Joe is able to speak Yiddish, and Mr. Hozansky is able to speak German, so they were able to get along. His wife isn't Jewish and speaks only French. The first thing on the table was a platter of cold meats. They tasted like salami, and we liked it. There were also urchins and pickled onions with it. They, of course, served the French brown bread, which tastes very much like our pumpernickel. After that, there was potato salad made with eggs and onions. With that, we had some red wine, which wasn't bad. Then she served something that looked like a pie, was made of dough and cheese. They said it was chinken something. You know the first word, chinken, like in chinken flacken. Anyway, after that, I thought the meal was over and that we were ready to leave, but in she came with a big platter of steaming roast chicken. She gave me the rear end, but it was very good with the gravy. With that, we had French fried potatoes and string beans, also some better wine. Then we had another bottle of wine, which was the oldest and best of all. After that, she served some cake and she had made and put out the snacks we had brought. With that, she served coffee and some schnapps. It was really a meal to be remembered. I couldn't get up from the table, I was so full. Anyway, we finally left about 5 in the evening. February 45, France. That was a shame that Ivan Chernyakhovsky was killed in Prussia. He was the youngest of all the Russian generals and a Jew. He certainly didn't take many prisoners either. After Königsberg would have fallen, he probably would have been made a marshal. Well, those are the unforeseen events of the war. There will no doubt be great tributes paid to him now that he is dead. That is so common for public sentiment. If all tributes were paid during the time a person were alive, think of how much better it would make that person feel. Well, the Russian advance will go on in spite of it, and we will soon smash the Nazis to bits. So what is the difference of one man, more or less? That is war, and there's not a damn thing to be done about it. I wonder what some of those people in the States who had anti-Semitic feelings will say about him and his ability. I suppose just as much as they say about the great Jewish physicians and lawyers. February 45, France. Just got back from seeing Mr. Skeffington with Betty Davis and Claude Rains. Amy, I thoroughly enjoyed it. The producers, a couple of Jewish brothers, really took a chance in presenting the problem of the Jew into a motion picture. It's a delicate situation and it was handled very, very well. In fact, when Claude Rains tries to tell his daughter about the advantages she would have by not following the Jewish faith, he gets all tangled up. However, it's a forceful scene that should have impressed a lot of people who had anti-Semitic feelings. It made a deep impression on me, and I suppose on a lot of other Jewish people. I wonder what the effect was on others in the States. When Raines sits down and plays with his young daughter, I nearly burst into tears, as it made me think so much of Carol Francis. She was about the same age in that scene. Then he said that a baby girl is always nice to have, as you can always kiss a girl, but when a boy gets old, you shake his hand. It was a very good picture. March of 45, still in France. I have an American station on the radio now, and I'm waiting to hear which station it is. It is the first one I've heard since we were in Naples last April. Gee, of all the breaks in the world, it is from New York, and they just began a new program dedicated to men in different cities. All of a sudden, a voice piped up, "Are you from St. Louis?" They are having this evening's program just for us. Can you imagine me getting to hear this? They started from Grand and Olive and went on downtown past the Missouri Pacific Building, the auditorium, and so many other old favorite spots of ours. They're in the mayor's office now, and he is giving us all the old sales talk about how welcome we will all be when we come home. They stopped at Toontown to broadcast some music by Bunny Berrigan's orchestra, which is there at this time. Of course, it was all a pre-recorded program from St. Louis, as it would take them too long to go around town and broadcast on the way. France Lau is now speaking about the baseball prospects. The cab driver is supposed to be taking them to Union Station after it's been redecorated. They just went from the Statler to the Chase. They went to the Zodiac Room. Then they mentioned going to Garavelli's for a roast beef and a bottle of beer, a hamburger at Bill Medart's, and introduced the Washington Hatchet Queen, who said the song fellows from St. Louis would want to hear the most was St. Louis Blues, so Ben Feld played it. I still can't get over it. Well, it's now midnight, so I better get some sleep. Regards to everybody. Lots of love for the baby and you, your Dave. March 45, last night I got 3 men to go with me to Temple, Les, Ellison, and Doug Winnickoff. We found a great turnout there, about 3,000 people, including civilians. They had a Seder, which I didn't expect as I ate regular chow at camp. However, they didn't have much to eat, so I could go to the Seder, which didn't have much to offer either as far as stomach-filling foods go. We all sat together along one end of the temple, and there were GIs galore there. The only ones who were allowed to sit at the Seder were the soldiers, and the civilians stood and served. The whole medical staff of the hospitals must have been there. If any emergency operations had come up, it would have been a tragedy. There was a Jewish chaplain who carried on the services. He introduced a 1-star general who's stationed in town, who gave a very enjoyable speech. He told us a story about a Jew who gave George Washington all his money and possessions to help in the Revolutionary War. After that, he went to France and borrowed $2 million more for the colonies. After the war, he died in poverty and was forgotten. Now, he was a great factor in helping to build the nation which we have now, and which is now defeating another movement which had tried to wipe out the Jewish race. So we ought to be very proud to say that a Jew was responsible for our great country. It was a nice story, and I felt very proud. After the general finished, a Gentile chaplain was introduced who gave us a strong speech in which he asked us to live as Abraham and Moses wanted us to live. After those two left, the Seder began. We had about 1/3 of a glass of white wine, a few bitter herbs, horseradish, and English-made matzahs. The first thing they served was gefilte fish, then potatoes, then buttered asparagus. It was a very nice thing to do, but there were so many men there, and it was so noisy. It really wasn't a well carried out Seder. April 45, now he's in Germany. I spoke to a fellow while back in Nancy who had just come over from the States as a replacement. He said that of all the towns that he had been in, St. Louis was the worst as far as morals went. He said that the girls were absolutely man-hungry and were easier to take out and sleep with than any other city's women. I was one surprised guy as he told us that. I'm very sorry to hear it also, and I hope that the VD rate is not as high as it was when I left. What is the latest situation from the viewpoint of a St. Louisan? April 14th, 45 in Germany. After evening chow yesterday, I received the Stars and Stripes, which headlined the death of FDR. We had heard a rumor of it that morning, but nothing definite till later in the day. It was very hard to even think that he was gone. Just the other day, I wrote that all big things happened during the month of April during this war, but I never dreamt it could have been his death. Now the war will have to end this month in order to make up for the tremendous loss which we have suffered. As a man, he was no different than any other man who comes from America. However, as our president and a symbol of free-thinking people, the rest of the world has lost more than we have. They were counting heavily on him and his influence on all the other allied countries. In one case in particular, France has lost its greatest chance for a quick recovery when de Gaulle failed to visit Roosevelt when invited to do so. That was one of the many mistakes that he's guilty of and will affect France after it's all over. As to FDR, we, the Jewish people in particular, have lost a representative voice. We will miss him greatly and will never again find a man from another faith who will do so much to try to beat down anti-Semitism as he did. I don't know what others say about it, but I felt he was doing us a great favor in being our president again. Not that we were doing him a favor by re-electing him to that unthankful office. Now that he has worked himself to death, as Wilson had done after the first war, I hope the Allies will not repeat the mistakes which they committed during Wilson's time. They owe that much, at least, to his memory. I'm afraid the Americans will never fully realize how great a man he actually was. It's only after one gets away from his home country that he is able to see how popular the American and his ideas are in other lands. The Italians will miss him most of all the other countries who look to him for aid. I guess many South American countries will alter their views after the European war is ended. I doubt very much if any of them will wage war in the Pacific theater in person. Well, international politics were never my line, so why worry about them? As an individual, there'll be nothing I'll be able to do about it. However, I do hope they don't forget the man who helped to save their countries from invasion, while his own countrymen were calling him a warmonger. May 1945. One thing I'm glad to see that the people back home are really seeing the atrocities which the Nazis had committed. It's ridiculous now when I read in the paper that 3 Nazi prisoners were given only 10 years for various forms of sabotage against us in the States. When will we start to mete out treatment which they will understand more clearly? You would be very much surprised if you really knew how deeply rooted the Nazi theory is embedded in their minds. It's been a matter of years of extensive propaganda, and we can't knock that influence out in kind treatment. They only understand atrocity and cruelty, so that is the way we ought to treat them. That must have been quite a relief when Aunt Ruth called up and told you that her nephew had been liberated. He must have gone through a lot to be in the hospital now. It's a wonder they didn't kill all the Jewish prisoners. I do have more, but I see that time is of the essence. So I want to get back now to some of the photos, but that gives you a taste of all the sorts of things that are in the letters. There's Dad on the street of Oran in 1944. And the next one is an Easter V-mail for Victory, where he did a little drawing to try to give Mom an idea of where he was in North Africa. And you can see it has their old address, 735 Leland Avenue, University City. During the war, Mom found 7541 Cornell, which is where my sister Patty and I were born and spent our childhood. Next photo. It is not the Ukraine, that is Naples in the spring of '44. And Dad was in the Jeep and got out to take a picture to record what it looked like after all the bombs dropped. Next picture is a fellow in the middle is a surrendered Italian officer. This is also in Naples. And the fellow on the left was one of Dad's friends from St. Louis, Max Sarver. Dad had an astonishing knack for running into people he knew, no matter where in the world he was dropped. So he ran into Max Sarver, and they were able to reminisce while they were fighting the war. Next is, there's the mezuzah that the rabbi gave Dad in 1944 at the bombed French synagogue. A little the worse for wear, but it has been through a world war. Next photo is the complete shot of Dad eating a piece of matzah with his Jewish friends next to him, looking at their prayer books. This was taken by Stars and Stripes magazine and would have been printed in it, except that diagonal black line on the fellow next to him was a scratch in the negative. And since they didn't have Photoshop in 1945, they nixed it, but they did let Dad have a copy of the photo, which is why we now have this. Next is, believe it or not, the actual mimeograph program, the front and back from the Passover Seder in Nancy, France in 1945. The inside had the menu of what they ate and the people that spoke. And then on the back, he had his Jewish buddies sign Happy Passover. The next shot is Dad holding Nancy in front of the Ulm Cathedral in Germany in 1945. He really loved that dog and wanted to find out a way to bring it home for Carol, but it wasn't in the cards. Next photo is Jerry Colonna at a USO show. Dad stopped him and asked if he could take his picture and asked him to wiggle his mustache, and he did so. And the next photo is of Bob Hope. Dad took this picture of Bob Hope resting at the USO show in Darmstadt, Germany in 1945. And Dad had a great seat and he was holding Nancy, the dog, who went with him everywhere. And at one point there was a woman, I don't know if that's her head on the right or not, but there was a woman that was tap dancing. And as she got near her finale, she started dancing more furiously and the taps were loud on the wooden stage. So Nancy got spooked and jumped out of Dad's arms and ran across the stage and started barking at the tap dancer, who stopped dancing because she was afraid Nancy would bite her. So Dad called the dog back and grabbed her. And then Hope walked up to the microphone and said to my dad, "You better grab that dog. If Crosby sees it, he'll throw a saddle over it." Because Bing Crosby was into thoroughbred horses at the time. And I think slang for a bad horse was a dog. And in a strange twist of fate, nearly 50 years later, I was at Bob Hope's house with Dick Cavett for an interview with Hope. And in between taping, I told Hope that story. I said, in Darmstadt, Germany in 1945, my dad brought his dog, and I told him his line about Crosby throwing a saddle over it. And Hope laughed. He said, "Is that what I said? Did I say that? Isn't that something?" So it was very strange to be able to give the story back to the man who had said it almost 50 years earlier. And the last of the photos is Dad in Piccadilly Circus in England in August of 45. That's where he was when victory over Japan was announced, which is a great relief to him because he was terrified of being sent to have to fight in the Pacific after this war was over. And he said that at night, you couldn't move. It was so jam-packed with people singing and dancing and drinking and hugging and kissing. But this was during the day when I guess most of them were hungover, but that's Dad. That's the last shot in my group of photos. And then finally, and this is a bit of luck, my sister Patty sat Dad down in February of '92 to do an oral history. And what none of us could have known was that Dad would die later that year. He and his wife went off to Israel and he picked up some sort of respiratory problem and he died by the end of that year. So I'm very grateful to Patty for sitting him down and asking. And what I did was I excerpted the chunk where he talks about World War II, because we've just seen and heard his voice when he was in his 20s overseas. Here he is now, nearly 76, reminiscing. So let's play that now. Shall we?
Hang on.
When you went into the military, we were already at war.
We were at war.
And when was it that you went in? What year?
I went in January of '43.
And went to California.
And they sent us to Jefferson Barracks for servicing. Went to, what was this town in Kansas? I'll never forget the barracks there. It was about 10 below zero. Maybe about 6 lights in this great big barracks that had about 100 guys in there. Ice cold water to shave with. That's what I remember about Kansas. From there, they put us on a train and sent us down to Clearwater, Florida. And that's where we had basic training. And then we went by train across the country to Pinedale, California, which is adjacent to Fresno. Camp Pinedale originally was a camp for the poor Japanese.
You mean a displacement camp?
It was a displacement camp for them, but it wasn't good enough to live in because of the muddy conditions there, but they gave it to the GIs to use. So I remember walking through mud up to my knees and on wood planks for sidewalks. And we were there. Oh yeah, then Amy and Carol came out, and I got an apartment on Van Ness in Fresno, and I was able to get home at night and weekends until we were alerted. And
So was it a short time until you had to leave, or? I mean,
I guess they were just out a few months,
few months.
because then we were shipped by train back to the East Coast to Hampton Roads, Virginia. Put us on a Liberty boat that was 10,500 tons, which is tiny. And then the storms began,
Oh.
and even the sailors were getting sick. So we puked for 3 days.
And where'd you land?
And we finally landed at Oran, not Iran, Oran, Algeria, the northern coast of Africa. And we were sent to an area near Lion Mountain. And we had an area that was like 30 below, not 30 below, but 30 degrees at night, and about 70 during the day. So you had hot and cold, and sometimes you wake up with ice over you. But we lived in tents, and when the African campaign was ended, we went over to Italy, where we landed at Naples. What else would you like to know? You want the continuation? From Naples, we moved up toward Rome. Some of the fellows went into a casino. We lost one man in a casino.
You lost one man in a casino?
No, at casino, which was a very tough area to get the German troops out of. No, I've forgotten the name of it. I was just about to give it to you when we started talking. There was a mountain north of Naples that the Germans had dug in and made it very difficult for Allied troops to get up. Here they are shooting right down at you. And finally they brought in a Polish group who had been experienced in mountain climbing, and with their donkeys were able to bring up their equipment. And finally they took this mountain. And that broke the strength of the Germans in that area, and we went up gradually up toward Rome. And when Rome fell, why they pulled us back into a staging area near Naples, and then we took a LST from there to southern France. That was
Is that
before.
when you were in Nancy?
Now that was before the invasion of Europe in northern France. So we were in southern France before that. So we landed at Saint-Tropez, and unfortunately it was not a resort. It was a little warmer. And went from there on up the Rhone Valley to Dijon, to Nancy, which was in Alsace-Lorraine. So we stayed in Nancy for a while, setting up communication lines with telephone, telegraph, and teletype.
And you had a dog there.
And that's where I got my little Dalmatian, Nancy. And then we crossed, when the crossings began at the Rhine, we crossed over at Mannheim and Ludwigshafen, Germany. And then went a little south to Darmstadt. And we ended up in a cavalry school right off the Autobahn, and that's where the war ended.
So how long were you overseas totally?
3 years.
Whoa. That's a long time.
So while we were in Oran, I got hold of a bottle of Moet Chandon champagne, and I was able to send it back home, and told my beloved wife not to open this until after I got home. And sure enough, it was there when we all got together again.
It's wonderful.
You were speaking about Nancy, my dog. The first dog I got was in Italy, and it was a little brown dog, and I named him Buck because I paid 100 lira for him, and 100 lira was $1. And Buck stayed with us for a while until we were starting to move up toward Rome, and these big half-tracks were coming through, making a lot of noise and rumbling and shaking the earth from the tracks. And this poor little dog had gotten down on the ground and got so nervous it ran underneath the tracks of one of these half-tracks. So a little later I was able to pick up Nancy, that kept us into England.
And then how did you leave Nancy when it was time to leave?
I had to. I said goodbye, Nancy.
Well, did you turn her over to somebody?
No, just left her in the barracks, and whoever's in the barracks still took care of Nancy.
So you got home from the war. Now Carol is about 4 or 5.
Carol was
What year did you get home?
45, December.
Yeah, so she was born in 42.
Yeah, 3.
She's 3.5. Well, that must have been a big change from when you were in Fresno with her.
Oh, yeah. And she sang "Kiss Me Once" and "Kiss Me Twice"
Carol did?
and "Kiss Me Once Again." It's been a long, long time.
Well, there was the man himself reflecting on his wartime years. That is the official end of my presentation. Susan, how are we okay time-wise?
Well, we're a little bit over, but if everyone wants to hang on, I know Steve will answer questions if anybody has anything.
So Zoom isn't going to just cut you off? Okay.
Nope.
All right, Marty, the hand lotion man, I see you there, and I knew you'd have a question. So what'll it be?
Not a question, a comment. I think this was wonderful. This is a
Thank you.
throwback. This is a throwback to yesteryear when books were written based upon letters. I
Yeah,
refer you to one instance of book about this, John Adams and Abigail. He was sent to Europe and he sent letters home and letters back, and the history was based on letters, just as this. It's wonderful.
thank you. Yeah, and of course the art of letter writing. You know, you can't do it with tweets and emails and emojis now.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it, Steve.
Thank you,
part-
Jay.
The part of your book that jumped out at me was when you were in a synagogue in London and walked in and saw Uncle Sal.
Yes, yeah, that's in there too. I didn't have time to read all the references because I was
Well,
watching
Sure
the
other
clock.
people have, sure other people have comments to make.
Any other? I only see a few people on the right. Norman, is that you? No, you have to
Norm,
unmute
you gotta
yourself.
unmute, Norm. I'm gonna give you a prompt.
Susan, are there more people than just those three?
Not that I can see.
Okay,
I wanted to say, Steve, that this was a marvelous presentation, you and your dad. And the way he pieced together history, and he had the time to do it in the midst spending all those years during the war.
yeah,
There must be something in the genes of your family that is creative, because you could just see it in all the things he described.
I think so. And our mother was very musical and also very quick-witted. So I suspect I was not adopted.
Nobody would think you're adopted. You look too much like your dad.
Yeah, it's that genetics thing we've heard about. Well, any other questions from any of the people that I didn't drive away?
Well, I just want to thank you for being here today, Steve. I want you all to know that Steve and I have been preparing for today for a few weeks now, and he is always as funny and charming in real life as he was in today's presentation. I know you will enjoy reading his book, and he obviously had many more letters that he could share with us, but we ran out of time. So
Oh, I should probably put in a shameless plug for people who would like to read the book. It is on Amazon in softcover, hardcover, and Kindle. Or if you would like to get a copy signed or personalized to you or to someone you know that might be interested in the history of it, you can order it from my website, which is Steve Stoliar, STOLIAR.com. And I will be happy to sign it however you wish and send it off to you. Likewise, the Groucho book, which was part of the introduction, Raised Eyebrows. And before we cut off, a brief update on Raised Eyebrows. There is going to be a film version of it that shoots this fall with Jeffrey Rush as the older Groucho. And I'm very jazzed about that because it's been a long time coming. But I thank you all for tuning in and listening to a bit of this time capsule from Patty. Do you have to use the restroom?
I have a question, and that is, I wonder if anyone in St. Louis knows of a place where the letters might end up eventually, because they shouldn't just be shredded and tossed in the trash.
No, well, I haven't done that to them yet.
well, that's a great question, Patty. And certainly we have a Holocaust museum at the Jewish Federation, and they're actually doing a huge renovation. It's going to be a hub for the entire Midwest once it's finished.
Oh, wow. Well, that's
So that might
certainly
would be
worth-
a great place, I think, for some photographs and some letters. And I certainly have contacts there, and I can get those to you, Steve. That's a
That'd
good,
be
that is
wonderful.
worth pursuing. Thank
absolutely.
you.
Well, and you know, the picture of your dad and he's eating matzah in the bombed out synagogue with his Jewish friends who are also soldiers, it just puts into perspective how lucky we are that next week we're going to be able to have our Passover Seders in freedom. And
We probably don't have to worry about anything happening to us unless Putin decides to nuke Chicago or something like that. And on that pleasant note, no,
we
I
can
think,
have
yeah.
more than 3 boxes of matzah too. So that's another benefit.
And
of-
it's the good American matzah. It's not that European rough, gray, thick, round stuff.
Exactly. Okay, and Lee also said, if not the Holocaust Museum, please consider the Mercantile Library as a home for the letters as well. So we have some good leads for you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And to those who will be celebrating, wishing you a sweet Pesach. Take care,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.